Thank you for joining Wars of the Rosies as we continue with Part 8, Entered Apprentice Lecture of Freemasonry Its Hidden Meaning by George H. Steinmetz. Chapter 7, Entered Apprentice Lecture. There is no special law for anybody, but anybody can specialize the law by using it with a fuller understanding of how much can be got out of it. Thomas Throw Ward. The third section of the first degree treats of a lodge, its form, supports, covering, furniture, ornaments, lights and jewels, how situated, and to whom dedicated. These are the introductory words of the lecture to the candidate, following the explanation of the rite of initiation whereby he has been inducted into the lodge. As this lecture is usually printed in full in manuals of almost all jurisdictions, the writer considers that fact sufficient criteria for him to quote as freely therefrom as he sees desirable. A lodge is a certain number of Freemasons, duly assembled, with the Holy Bible, square and compasses, and a charter from a Grand Lodge authorizing them to meet and work. 2. Meet and work means to assemble and operate in Masonry. But as we are informed that the Holy Bible is the great light of Masonry and is given us as the rule and guide of our faith and practice, it is apparent that it is a necessity in any lodge. The square and compasses are emblematic of the dominion of the spiritual over the material, the achievement of which is the only true purpose of meeting and working. While comparatively of modern origin, the charter from a Grand Lodge is essential for the material, subordinate lodge to operate lawfully. A lodge can be formed without a charter from a Grand Lodge, but it would be clandestine and not recognized by regular Masons, and it will not prosper because it operates illegally. From this we learn a lesson in the spiritual operation of universal law. Just as a clandestine lodge can be formed, having all the outward appearances of a regular lodge, so certain spiritual and psychic forces may be invoked, having the appearance of the genuine, but not being in conformity with the constructive principle in nature, will react to the detriment of the individual. One need but turn to some of the more recent findings of modern psychology to verify this lesson. The form of a lodge is from east to west, between north and south, from the center to the circumference, and from earth to heaven. This is said to denote the universality of Freemasonry and that a Freemason's charity should know no bounds. This is only the rational explanation. This description of a lodge is not that of a material lodge, but of the universe itself. It extends from east to west, from north to south, from the center to the circumference, and from earth to heaven. Figuratively, it extends from earth to heaven. Scientifically, it extends or encompasses earth, or the material, and heaven, or the spiritual. A spiritual man is a member of this lodge, meeting and working in the great lodge, the universe. There he is to practice those great moral virtues which are inculcated in the material lodge, and which will assist the great architect in the building of that temple which he has planned and over which he presides as master. The supports of a lodge are three: denoted wisdom, strength, and beauty, because there should be wisdom to contrive, strength to support, and beauty to adorn all great and important undertakings. This allegory, like many another, has two distinct meanings which may be more readily appreciated in the statement of Pythagoras that God made two things in his image, the universe itself and man. It is a mathematical axiom that things equal to the same thing are equal to each other. If both the universe and man are made in the image of God, man is also in the image of the universe. He is the universe in miniature. As symbolical of the universe, these three columns represent the wisdom of the universe, mind, the strength of that great power, and the resultant beauty and harmony which infinite wisdom, working through infinite power, has produced. As emblematic of man, we find the three sides of the triangle, the wisdom of the cyclical, supported by the strength of the physical, resulting in the beauty of the spiritual. Again, in a different form, under a different allegorical treatment, we are taught the same lesson of masonry. Man is triune, and no man is perfect, nor can he attain to perfection without giving due consideration to each plane of being. All three must be blended in the perfect harmony, which is the perfect man. The covering of a lodge is no less than the clouded canopy or star-decked heavens. The heavens typifies the spiritual as above the material, and is so used here. Heaven is not a place but a state of being. We hope to at last arrive by the aid of the theological ladder which Jacob, in his vision, saw extending from earth to heaven. The statement that this ladder had three principal rounds is not in conformity with ancient teaching, which attributes 7 rounds to the ladder. The explanation of the 7 rounds is occult, and, as the lecture refers to 3 rounds, our explanation will attempt to cover the lecture rather than raise the question as to the correctness of its statements. If the reader will refer to page 120, where the 7 liberal arts and sciences are discussed, further light on the 7 is revealed, and it is directly in connection with these rounds of the ladder. Although the ritual does not call attention to the connection, the theological ladder which Jacob saw in his vision had 3 principal rounds which are denoted faith, hope, and charity, which admonishes us to have faith in God, hope in immortality, and charity to all mankind. The greatest of these is charity, for faith may be lost in sight, hope end in fruition, but charity extends beyond the grave, through the boundless realms of eternity. It is no coincidence that it is possible to substitute for faith, hope, and charity in the same consequence, cyclical, physical, and spiritual. This passage will then read, the greatest of these is spiritual, for the physical may be lost in sight, death of the body. The cyclical end in fruition. The intellect may perceive the ultimate and have no more to learn, but the spiritual extends beyond the grave, through the boundless realms of eternity. Thus the means of attaining heaven or perfection is pointed out to us. Again, the candidate has been told of man's trinity of being, and another symbol is made use of to light the way. The ornaments of a lodge are the Mosaic Pavement, the Indented Tessel, and the blazing star. The Mosaic Pavement is emblematic of human life, checkered with good and evil. This is the least that it typifies. Its real purpose is to furnish an insight into the working of the great universal law of compensation. It is a repeated reminder that there is darkness as well as light, an ebb tide as well as flow. It also contains a more subtle lesson. The Mosaic Pavement of Solomon's temple was the floor across which the ancient Jew walked towards the Holy of Holies. Thus, to arrive at that sacred place, he must use the black squares as well as the white to walk upon. He learned that as he progressed through life towards perfection, he should profit from the so-called evil experiences, the ills and misfortunes encountered along the way, equally with the good. From this, the Jew was to formulate that philosophy which grew to be the dominant factor in his life, and which no doubt is largely responsible for his preservation to this day. He discovered that while one may not be able to change conditions and has little control over them, he can control his own attitude towards these conditions. He might not be able to escape stepping upon the black squares in the pavement, but he could use them as stepping stones to further his progress toward his desired goal. Mackey gives a lengthy description in his Masonic Encyclopedia of the Indented Tessel, recites the various names by which it has been called, and supplies an exoteric explanation of its symbology. He neither gives nor does he infer any esoteric significance. The writer has been unable to discover any ancient symbolism with which it may be connected. Pike disposes of it as having no symbolic meaning, and if any is attached to it, it is fanciful and arbitrary. The blazing star consists of two equilateral triangles. The Shield of David, also sometimes known as the Seal of Solomon, the equilateral triangle with an apex pointing downward, is emblematical of the Creator, the apex pointing towards the universe, the created. The equilateral triangle with an apex pointing upward is the symbol of the perfect man, man in his image. The apex pointing to God, the Creator. When intertwined as a six-pointed star, they form a single figure, symbol of the final unity of God and the perfect divine man. This is the symbol of at-one-ment. Likewise, it is the symbol of the Buddhist nirvana, the misunderstood and therefore much maligned absorption into the universe. Of the individual, here within the symbol itself is the refutation that this absorption is annihilation, as ineptly interpreted by the Western religionist. Study the six-pointed star produced by combining these two triangles. Note carefully that thus intertwined they form a single figure, yet each retains its own identity, and the outline is clearly discernible. The star is emblematic of the complete harmonic relation between the positive and receptive forces of nature. It depicts the action and reaction of Oriental religions. To the Mason, it may well demonstrate the perfect ashlar, placed in that proper position, in that house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. The rough ashlar is a perfect stone as taken from the quarry in its rude and natural state. The perfect ashlar is a stone made ready by the hands of the workmen, to be adjusted by the working tools of the fellow craft. By the rough ashlar, we are reminded of our rude and imperfect state by nature. By the perfect ashlar of the state of perfection, at which we hope to arrive by virtuous education, our own endeavors, and the blessing of God. The first thing that occurs to one in contemplating the ashlar is the incorrect symbology in most of our modern lodge rooms, where a rough ashlar and a perfect ashlar are exhibited, consisting of a rough stone and a polished stone. These stones are invariably oblong in shape. To carry out properly the intended symbology, they should be perfect cubes. By the rough ashlar, we are reminded of our rude and imperfect state by nature. This statement is a direct contradiction to the claim made by the apprentice in answer to the first question asked him in his proficiency examination. Therein he claimed his state by nature was one favored of God, in completeness of being, far from being rude and imperfect. It is also at variance with sacred scripture, which informs us that man's original state by nature was perfect prior to man's fall from that high estate, as depicted in the story of the Garden of Eden. As encountered in our daily lives, man's state is admittedly rude and imperfect. By erroneous thinking, man applies the universal destructive principle and brings himself to a state which may be correctly so described. It is a universal truth that the negative is but the absence of the positive, and man's present state is evidence of this fact. It is also illuminating proof of the creative power of mind. Man's tendency to think limitations, illness, war, and poverty has created for him the things he visualizes in strict accordance with the law and brought him to his present, rude and imperfect state. The perfect ashlar is the same stone, after it has been made ready for the builder by the hands of the workmen. The meaning is thinly veiled in allegory. Apparently the design was not to make this lesson too difficult of discernment. The workman is the subjective mind, breaking off the rough corners at the prompting of the objective mind, the better to fit us for the builder's use. According to the quotation, 3 things are essential. First, acquire a virtuous education. Second, it is only by our own endeavors. And lastly, by the blessing of God. Again, the ask, seek, and knock is evident. We alone must do the educating. We must do the striving. We cannot expect universal law to do for us that which, by its very nature, it can only do through us. Only after we have done our part and of our own volition have helped ourselves may we expect the blessing of God, the working of universal law. It must be of our own free will and accord. A lodge is situated due east and west. Peoples who worship the sun face the east, where the physical light first appeared each morning. This is the rational explanation of the master rising in the east. However, the esoteric significance of this custom has its origin in occult philosophy. This philosophy is of the great masters of India, who are said to have first discerned and promulgated it. It teaches the essential truth of man's being, and this knowledge of the East traveling westward with man's migration to the West. Therefore, the ancients looked to the East as the source of intellectual and spiritual light, just as we look to the East or to the master of the lodge for Masonic enlightenment. In passing, the writer cannot resist the opportunity to remark what glorious progress Freemasonry could enjoy if the masters of our lodge understood Masonic symbology and fitted themselves to be, in fact, one of the lesser lights of the lodge over which each presides. The craft might not then look to them in vain for enlightenment. Freemasons of the present day dedicate their lodges to St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist, the 2 eminent patrons of Masonry, and since their time there is represented in every regular and well-governed lodge a certain point within a circle embroidered by 2 perpendicular lines, representing these 2 saints, and upon the vertex of the circle rests the Holy Bible. The point represents the individual brother, the circle, the boundary line of his duty, beyond which he is never to suffer his passions, prejudices, or interest to betray him. In going around this circle, we necessarily touch upon these 2 lines, as well as upon the Holy Bible, and while a Freemason keeps himself circumscribed within their precepts, it is impossible that he should materially err. The point within the circle is an ancient Egyptian sign for the sun and Osiris. It originally had no connection with the two perpendicular lines, and most certainly not with the Holy Bible upon the vertex. Neither was the point in any way connected with an individual. On some ancient monuments, a point within the circle is shown between two upright serpents, which were at times conventionalized into two straight lines. However, the ascribing of these lines to Saint John is too far-fetched to be tangible. The sign is astrological. Possibly the 3 points which are encountered in going around the circle have reference to the 3 positions of the sun described in the opening of a lodge by the 3 principal officers. This is purely speculation on the part of the writer, and I have no data to substantiate it. Pike, commenting upon the symbology in Morals and Dogma, states, "It is said by some, with a nearer approach to interpretation, that the point within the circle represents God in the center of the universe. In the Kabbalah, the point is Yod, the creative energy of God, irradiating with light the circular space with God, the universal light, left vacant, wherein to create the worlds by withdrawing his substance of light back on all sides from one point. As the point is interpreted in some instances to represent deity in the midst of his universe, so may it symbolize his image and likeness, man, in the center of his universe, the vast expanse of which is only boundary or limitation placed upon him. From this, man may learn that the possibilities of human evolution are as boundless as infinity, the universe itself. If we must account for the 2 parallel lines on either side of the circle, let them remind us that man's evolution must be between the 2 columns, Boaz and Jacob. This evolution, this progress, must be a personal choice, and it must conform to universal law. This explanation purportedly excludes the Holy Bible and the Saint John, separating them from a symbolism of which they have no part. The original introduction of the Saint John into Masonic symbology was astrological. Exactly how interpreted and how used has been obscured by time, lack of written records, and ignorance of astrology on the part of those who have handed down the symbology. St. John's Day, celebrated December 27th, is near the winter solstice, December 22nd. Undoubtedly, this has some connection with the material phenomena of the sun at the furthermost southern point and the shortest day of the year. A peculiar feature of St. John's the Baptist's Day is that it is claimed to be his actual birthday. Usually the saint's day of other saints is the day of their death, looked upon as the day of birth into a better life. It is most unlikely that any evidence exists for this date, and it appears as arbitrary. Such being the case, it cannot be termed coincidence that it is named as June 24, or within 2 days of the summer solstice, June 22nd. Attention is also directed to the fact that, from that date, in the northern hemisphere, the length of the day decreases. In John 3:30, John the Baptist is quoted as saying, "He must increase, but I must decrease." Again, the reader is reminded of the 3 positions of the sun described by the officers of the lodge in the opening ceremonies. If taken in conjunction with the 4 apparent orbital positions of the sun, a vast field of speculation is opened up. This, however, is beyond the provision of the present work, and must be left to such further thought as the reader cares to devote to it. Prior to the 16th century, St. John the Baptist was the only patron saint of Freemasonry. St. John the Evangelist, being introduced subsequent to that time. Dr. Delcho says, the stern integrity of St. John the Baptist, which induced him to forego every minor consideration in discharging the obligations he owed to God, the unshaken firmness with which he met martyrdom rather than betray his duty to his master, his steady reproval of vice and continued preaching of repentance and virtue, make him a fit patron of the Masonic institution. Mackey says of St. John the Evangelist, his constant admonition in his epistles to the cultivation of brotherly love and the mystical nature of his apocalyptic visions have been, perhaps, the principal reasons for the veneration paid him by the craft. The closing paragraphs of this lecture, Mother Earth alone of all the elements having never proved unfriendly to man, deals with the material man and material conditions. It is appropriate that in the lecture of the material degree of Freemasonry, the most material of the four elements is stressed. The earth is spoken of as the kindly provider and sustainer, and finally, when at last he is called to pass through the dark valley of the shadow of death, she once more receives him and piously covers his remains with her bosom. This admonishes us that from earth we come and to earth we must shortly return. This is a dissonant note contributed by some inexpert player in the great orchestra which is Masonic philosophy. It is entirely out of harmony with the profound teaching of the mysteries, the true parent of Freemasonry. The mysteries, and, correctly interpreted, Freemasonry, teach the candidate concerning the physical and material, not with the view of impressing upon him that from earth he came and to earth he must shortly return. The object in teaching him of the material is that he shall make his body into a fitting habitation for the soul, that the material may serve as a solid foundation for his cyclical and spiritual development. According to the teachings of the mysteries, insofar as we know them, physical death was but an incident in man's experience, no more important than any other physical incident. Allen's present attitude towards death is but further evidence of how far he has shade bona the truth regarding himself. The mystery's only interest in death of the physical body was to teach man that it was inevitable and not to be feared. The profound lesson of the mysteries was how man might live his immortal life, of which this life is a definite part, in conformity with the constructive principle of his own being. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Rosies. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.